The sun blazed high over the dusty little frontier town as wagons lined the main street, and townsfolk poured toward the whitewashed church at its center, their voices buzzing with excitement like a hive of restless bees. This was the wedding everyone had been waiting for, the event that would be spoken of for years to come. For today, Clara Whitfield, the most beautiful and admired woman in 3 counties, was to marry Luke Carson, the hard-working rancher whose cattle empire stretched beyond the horizon. Clara stood at the edge of the church steps, in a gown of pale cream silk, trimmed with delicate lace, brought all the way from St. Louis, her veil trailing behind her like spun sunlight. Women whispered in admiration, men tipped their hats, and even the children stilled their play to gawk at her radiant smile. Clara basked in their attention, her chin lifted proudly, her every movement calculated to dazzle. Behind her, half hidden in the shadow of the doorway, stood her younger sister, Rose, her hands clasped nervously in front of her simple gray dress. Rose's hair was pulled back in a modest braid, her face pale and downcast, as though she wished she could vanish entirely into the woodwork. She had been ordered by Clara to assist quietly with the ceremony. Nothing more. All her life, Rose had been the quiet one, the invisible one, always standing just out of the spotlight, while Clara soaked up admiration like a flower drinking sunlight. Yet even as she tried to still her trembling hands, her heart ached with love for her sister, and a desperate hope that Clara's future with Luke would bring happiness to them all. Inside the church, pews creaked under the weight of the gathered crowd. Mayor Briggs sat front and center, wiping sweat from his brow with a red kerchief, while Clara's friends clustered like a flock of brightly plumed birds, their voices sharp with gossip. The scent of wildflowers mixed with the warm tang of polished wood, and shafts of golden light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that swirled lazily in the heavy summer air. Luke Carson stood at the altar, his tall frame rigid, his jaw set in a line so firm it could have been carved from stone. He wore a clean black suit, but his calloused hands and sun-browned skin marked him clearly as a man of the land. The townsfolk whispered about how fortunate Clara was to be chosen by such a man, though some privately wondered why Luke's gray eyes seemed distant, almost haunted, as he stared out over the crowd. Clara swept down the aisle on her father's arm, her veil fluttering behind her, her smile blinding. As she passed, women sighed, and men straightened their shoulders, caught in the glow of her perfection. Rose slipped into a back pew, folding her hands tightly in her lap, trying to ignore the way Clara's friends snickered behind gloved hands at her plain dress. The ceremony began with solemn words spoken by the minister, his voice rising and falling like a hymn. And as he spoke of love and union, Rose's heart clenched. She risked a glance at Luke, and was startled to see him watching her, not Clara, with an unreadable expression that made her breath catch. As the vows drew near, the church grew hushed, the only sounds the fluttering of paper fans and the soft whimper of a baby in the back pew. Clara's face glowed with triumph as she waited for Luke to pledge himself to her, certain that nothing could mar her perfect day. Rose pressed her trembling hands together, silently praying for strength, though she didn't know why. Luke's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady, but there was a strange tension beneath it, like the stillness before a storm. Every head tilted forward to hear, the crowd holding its collective breath. And then, just as the minister turned to Clara with a proud smile, Luke lifted his hand, not toward Clara, but toward Rose, standing frozen in the back pew. A collective gasp tore through the church like a gunshot as hats tumbled and fans stilled, and Clara's smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face. Luke's storm-gray eyes burned with determination as he prepared to speak words that would shatter the world they all thought they knew. The silence in the church was so complete that even the buzzing flies seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating stillness as every eye turned toward Luke and then toward Rose, who stood frozen near the back pew with her hands pressed to her mouth, unable to believe what was happening. Clara blinked rapidly, her perfect smile crumbling as confusion twisted into rage, her cheeks flushing scarlet beneath her veil. "Luke," she hissed, her voice cutting through the heavy air like a knife. "What are you doing? This is our wedding day, our vows, our future." The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers, women clutching at pearls and men leaning forward hungry for scandal. Luke's voice was steady but unyielding as he spoke, his gaze never leaving Rose. "I cannot marry Clara," he said, each word deliberate and clear. "My heart does not belong to her. It belongs to Rose." The words crashed through the church like thunder, and pandemonium followed. Clara let out a strangled scream, stumbling back a step as her father surged forward, his fists clenched, his face mottled red with fury. "You dare humiliate my daughter in front of the entire town?" he thundered, spit flying from his mouth. "After everything we've done to make this union happen?" Mayor Briggs tried to intervene, his hands raised, but the crowd had already descended into chaos. Clara's friends shrieked and clutched one another, whispering venomous rumors even as they wept for their darling Clara. At the edge of the pews, Rose shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. "No, Luke, please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't say my name like that. I never wanted this." But Luke's expression softened only for her as he stepped down from the altar, his boots echoing against the wooden floor, his hand extended toward her. "You have always been the one I admired, the one with a heart as true as the open prairie," he said, his voice carrying over the din. "Clara's beauty may have blinded others, but not me. I will not build a life on lies." Clara ripped her veil from her head with a violent motion, her hair tumbling in disarray as she pointed a shaking finger at her sister, her voice rising to a piercing shriek. "You snake! You've been plotting this all along, haven't you? Pretending to be meek, pretending to love me, while secretly seducing him behind my back?" The crowd gasped, their murmurs turning dark and suspicious as several townsfolk cast accusing glances toward Rose. Rose staggered back, horrified, her hands raised as if to ward off the hatred pressing in on her. "No," she sobbed, her voice raw. "I never betrayed you, Clara, I swear it." But Clara's lies fell like poisoned seeds, sprouting instantly in the minds of those eager for drama. A stone-faced Evelyn, Clara's closest friend, hissed loudly enough for all to hear. "I always knew Rose was jealous of Clara's beauty." The crowd buzzed with agreement, their whispers like wasps' wings. Luke turned on them, fury in his gray eyes. "Enough," he roared. "You will not twist this into something vile. I chose Rose because she is pure of heart, because she has been wronged too many times by those who claim to love her. If anyone dares speak against her, they will answer to me." But Clara only laughed, a bitter, broken sound that echoed off the rafters. "You think you can protect her, Luke? You've made her a target. From this day forward, everyone will know her name, but only as a thief who stole what was mine." She swept from the church with her father close behind, the crowd following in a storm of whispers and outrage, leaving Rose trembling in Luke's arms as the torn veil lay crumpled on the church floor like the shattered remains of a dream. By the next morning, the entire town buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest, every porch and shop filled with neighbors whispering and speculating, their words spreading faster than wildfire across the plains. Clara had spent the night locked in her room, weeping loud enough for the whole street to hear, while her father stormed about threatening vengeance on Luke and anyone who dared defend him. At the mercantile, Women pretended to browse bolts of fabric while huddling in corners to repeat every rumor they'd heard, each tale more dramatic than the last. "She tricked him with tears," one insisted, slamming a basket of sugar on the counter. "Poor Clara, she never stood a chance against that snake of a sister." Others swore they'd seen Rose sneaking to Luke's ranch in the dark of night, though no such thing had ever happened. Rose herself remained inside her small room above the bakery where she worked, curled on her narrow bed with her hands clamped over her ears, trying to block out the voices that seemed to haunt even her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Clara's face twisted with rage, heard her accusations ringing like a death knell. When she finally rose, she found a crowd gathered outside the bakery, their faces cold and judgmental. Someone had scrawled the word "thief" in black soot across the bakery door. Tears burned her eyes as she scrubbed at the hateful mark with trembling hands, but no matter how hard she scrubbed, the word seemed to linger, etched into her soul. At his ranch, Luke stood firm despite the storm brewing around him. His foreman, James, urged caution. "The whole town's turned against you, Luke," he warned grimly, adjusting his hat. "They're saying you bewitched Rose, that you humiliated Clara just to get back at her father. If you don't speak up, they'll run you both out." Luke's jaw tightened, his storm-gray eyes flashing. Let them talk. Truth doesn't need their approval. Still, beneath his anger lay worry for Rose, who bore the brunt of the town's cruelty. Determined to protect her, he rode into town, his presence commanding as he dismounted in front of the bakery. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he lifted Rose gently onto his horse, ignoring the jeers and whispers that followed. "She stays with me now," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Anyone with a problem can bring it to my face." Rose clung to him, torn between gratitude and shame, her cheeks wet with tears. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered as they rode away. "Now they'll hate you too." Luke glanced down at her, his expression softening. "They already do. But I'd rather face their hatred than see you suffer alone." Back at her family home, Clara stood at the window, watching them ride away with a face like carved marble. Evelyn hovered at her shoulder, her voice sharp with malice. "You can't let them win, Clara. The town loves you. Use that." Clara's lips curved into a smile, cold and deadly. "Oh, I will. If they want to believe Rose is a villain, I'll make sure the story spreads so far no one remembers the truth. By the time I'm finished, she'll wish she'd never been born." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first flames of Clara's revenge began to take shape. She visited her father's powerful friends, whispering poison into their ears, spinning tales of betrayal and deceit until even the most level-headed citizens began to doubt Luke's honor and Rose's innocence. By nightfall, riders carried Clara's lies to every distant farm and homestead, setting the stage for a conflict that would soon consume them all. At the ranch, Luke stood on the porch beside Rose, gazing out at the darkening horizon. He knew the fight ahead would be brutal, but when he looked at Rose's tear-streaked face, a fierce vow took root in his heart. No matter what it cost, he would stand by her, even if the entire world turned against them. The days that followed felt like walking through a nightmare for Rose, each sunrise bringing new whispers, sharper glares, and fresh accusations. Everywhere she went, the weight of the town's hatred pressed down like a physical force, suffocating her. Women who had once greeted her kindly now crossed the street to avoid her, their lips curling with contempt. Children, repeating the poison they heard at home, shouted cruel names when she passed, their laughter cutting deeper than knives. Even in the quiet sanctuary of Luke's ranch, Rose could feel the venomous gaze of the town reaching across the miles. She tried to help James and the other ranch hands with chores, hoping to prove herself useful, but every stumble or mistake seemed to confirm the townsfolk's lies. Clara's campaign of destruction spread like wildfire, fueled by her flawless performance of grief and outrage. She attended Sunday service draped in black lace, her face pale and perfect. Her voice breaking as she told anyone who would listen that Rose had stolen her happiness, that Luke had been bewitched by a jealous sister's scheming heart. The crowd ate up her every word, their sympathy hardening into anger against Rose and Luke. Evelyn played her part as well, fluttering from neighbor to neighbor with juicy morsels of gossip, embellishing Clara's tales with details that grew more salacious with each retelling. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, Clara met secretly with a man named Walter Briggs, the mayor's ambitious nephew and a known rival of Luke's. Walter lounged in a chair at Clara's parlor, his boots propped carelessly on her expensive rug, his eyes glittering with greed, as Clara poured him a glass of whiskey. "The town's ready to turn on Luke," Walter said with a sly grin. "One more push and they'll vote to strip him of his grazing rights. That'll ruin his ranch and his reputation in one stroke." Clara's smile was as sharp as broken glass. "Do it," she said, her voice low and venomous. "Take everything from him. I want him destroyed, and I want Rose crawling back to me in disgrace." Walter raised an eyebrow. "And what do I get in return?" Clara moved closer, her beauty a weapon as potent as any rifle. "When Luke is gone, you'll have the largest ranch in the county, and me by your side." Walter's grin widened. "We have a deal." They sealed it with a clink of glasses, their alliance forged in betrayal. Back at the ranch, Luke tried to shield Rose from the worst of the rumors, but even he couldn't hide the toll it was taking on her. Late at night, she would sit on the porch, staring out at the stars with silent tears streaking her cheeks, clutching the torn veil that had been left behind at the ruined wedding. Luke sat beside her one evening, his hand covering hers. "I know this is tearing you apart," he said softly, "but you have to trust me. I chose you because you're the one person whose soul shines brighter than all their lies." Rose shook her head, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this, Luke. I never wanted to hurt Clara, or you, or anyone. I just wanted to live quietly, unseen." Luke's jaw tightened. "The day I let you live in shadows is the day I stop being a man worth loving." His words burned into her heart, filling her with a fragile spark of courage. But as a rider approached through the dusk, dust billowing behind him, that spark flickered. The messenger leapt from his horse, breathless and pale. "Luke," he panted, "the council's meeting tonight. Clara and Walter, they're convincing everyone to take your land. If you don't fight back now, by morning it'll all be gone." Luke's eyes darkened with stormy resolve as he rose, his voice like iron. "Then we fight." Behind him, Rose clutched the veil, terror and determination warring in her chest, knowing that Clara's lies were about to ignite into a battle that could destroy them all. Night had fallen heavy and dark by the time Luke and Rose rode into town, their horses' hooves striking sharp against the packed dirt road, the air thick with the smell of oil lamps and brewing trouble. The council hall glowed like a furnace at the heart of the town, light spilling through its open windows, the sound of angry voices carrying into the street. A crowd had gathered outside, townsfolk craning their necks to glimpse the drama unfolding inside, their whispers as sharp and cutting as the prairie wind. Rose kept her head down, her bonnet shielding her tear-swollen eyes, but she could feel the hatred pressing against her skin like heat from a fire. Beside her, Luke sat tall and unflinching, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the hall with a determination that brooked no fear. As they dismounted, the crowd parted reluctantly, mutters rising. Someone spat near Rose's feet. Someone else hissed, "Thief," under their breath, her chest constricted. but she forced herself to follow Luke's broad-shouldered form into the hall, clinging to the strength in his stride. Inside, the atmosphere was worse. Clara stood at the center of the room, draped in black like a grieving widow, her beauty heightened by artful tears glimmering on her cheeks. Walter Briggs loomed beside her, his smug smile twisting like a snake as he addressed the councilmen seated in a semicircle of worn chairs. "This man," Walter declared, stabbing a finger toward Luke, "has dishonored not only Clara but this entire town. He humiliated her in front of God and man, then flaunted his scandal by parading her sister about like a prize he stole. If we allow such behavior to go unpunished, what does that say about our values?" Clara bowed her head, trembling, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "I only wanted to bring pride to my family, to unite our names. Now I am left broken. And my poor father's health is failing from the shame." The room filled with murmurs of sympathy, heads nodding in agreement. Luke's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Rose took a step forward, her hands shaking as she held the torn veil against her chest. "It isn't true," she said, her voice small but steady. "I never asked for any of this. I love my sister, but she's lying to you. Luke didn't steal me away. He chose me because—" She faltered, glancing at Luke, whose encouraging nod gave her strength. "Because he saw the truth of my heart." A ripple of derisive laughter ran through the crowd. Evelyn's voice rang out like a whip crack. "Truth! The only truth here is that you destroyed Clara's life and now hide behind false modesty." Clara lifted her head, her face a mask of righteous fury. "Enough of her pathetic excuses," she cried, pointing dramatically toward Luke. "He has poisoned this town with his arrogance. I say we strip him of his grazing rights and return the balance of power to those who respect our traditions." Walter seized the moment. "A vote, gentlemen," he urged, his oily voice slithering through the tense room. "Let us decide now." Hands began to rise, slowly at first, then in a surge that made Rose's breath catch. Luke's land, his legacy, was about to be stolen through lies. In desperation, Rose reached for the veil, holding it high for all to see. "This was Clara's!" she shouted, her voice breaking. "It tore when she struck me that day, when her anger spilled out for just a moment. If she truly were the victim, would she need to lie and spread hatred?" Gasps echoed, but Clara's face only hardened. "Sister," she hissed, her mask slipping, "you have no idea what I'm capable of." The council chamber erupted, half the town shouting for justice, the other half for punishment. Luke seized Rose's hand and pulled her close, his voice low and fierce. "We can't win this here," he said. "Clara's buried her lies too deep. We need proof, and I think I know where to find it." As they fled the hall under a hail of insults, Clara's laughter followed them into the night, chilling Rose's blood and promising that this battle was far from over. The moon hung low over the prairie, casting a pale glow across the rugged landscape as Luke and Rose rode hard for the far edge of town, the cool night air biting against their cheeks. Behind them, the council hall burned with lamplight and fury, Clara's laughter echoing in Rose's ears like a haunting refrain. Luke's jaw was set in grim determination, his storm-gray eyes focused ahead as he guided his horse toward the rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. "We need proof," he said, his voice tight, almost swallowed by the wind. "Clara's turned half the town into her army. If we don't uncover her dealings with Walter Briggs and the cattle thieves, there'll be nothing left to fight with but words, and words won't save us." Rose clung to him, the torn veil clutched tightly in her hand. "What if there is no proof?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if they've hidden everything too well?" Luke glanced back at her, his expression softening for a moment. Clara's pride is her weakness. She'll have left something behind, a letter, a coin, anything to remind herself of her cleverness. His tone hardened again. And when we find it, we'll show the whole town who she really is. While Luke and Rose searched for truth, Clara was already weaving her next trap. In the parlor of Walter Briggs' lavish home, she sat like a queen on her throne, her black mourning dress carefully arranged to accentuate her beauty while projecting fragility. Walter poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, his eyes glittering with amusement as he listened to Clara recount the evening's events. "You played them well," he drawled. "The vote will pass by week's end, and Luke will lose everything he's built. Once he's ruined, we can swoop in and take over his grazing lands, and the cattle that come with them." Clara smiled, a cold, sharp thing that never reached her eyes. "I want more than his land," she said, her voice dripping venom. "I want him to watch as Rose suffers. She humiliated me in front of everyone, even if she didn't mean to. No one forgets a spectacle like that. When I'm through, they'll spit on her name the way they once praised mine." Walter chuckled darkly. "The traders we've been working with will be pleased. They've been itching to push deeper into the valley. With Luke out of the way, they'll have free rein." Outside, a ranch hand who had overheard their plotting slipped quietly into the shadows, racing toward Luke's ranch with the news. Meanwhile, Rose and Luke arrived at an abandoned cabin deep in the valley, a place Luke suspected Clara used for secret meetings. The door creaked ominously as they stepped inside, their lantern casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The smell of smoke and old whiskey lingered, mingled with the faint metallic tang of coins. On a rickety table lay a map marked with circles and X's, notes scribbled in Clara's unmistakable handwriting, and a leather pouch overflowing with silver. Rose's breath caught. This proves everything," she whispered, clutching Luke's arm. "She's been selling you out to the traders all along." Luke's jaw tightened, his face carved from stone. "We take this to the council tomorrow. With this, they can't deny the truth." But before they could leave, a shadow filled the doorway. Walter himself stood there, flanked by two rough-looking traders with rifles. "Going somewhere?" he sneered, his smile razor-sharp. "I knew you couldn't resist snooping around." Rose's heart pounded as Luke moved protectively in front of her, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "You'll never win," Luke growled. Walter's laughter was cold and mocking. "I already have. By dawn, this valley will belong to me, and your precious Rose will be nothing but another casualty of your stubbornness." Outside, the faint glow of torches signaled more riders approaching. They were surrounded, and the final battle was about to begin. The night air reeked of sweat, smoke, and fear as Rose's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the mocking laughter of Walter and the traders who now closed in around the cabin like wolves circling wounded prey. Luke's stance was steady and defiant, his storm-gray eyes glinting like steel beneath the flickering torchlight. But even he couldn't hide the danger they faced. 3 rifles aimed at his chest, more riders gathering outside, and Walter blocking the only exit with a predator's grin. Rose's trembling hands clutched the pouch of silver and the damning map they had discovered, her mind screaming at her to hide, to disappear as she had always done in the shadow of her sister's brilliance. But as she looked at Luke standing so bravely in front of her, she knew hiding was no longer an option. This was her moment to prove that she was more than Clara's quiet, overlooked sister. Walter sneered, taking a slow step forward. "Hand over the evidence, sweetheart," he said, his oily voice dripping false charm. "No one needs to get hurt, least of all you. Let Luke face the consequences of his arrogance alone." Luke's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "She'll never give it to you," he growled, and you'll have to kill me before you touch her." Walter smirked, tilting his head. "That can be arranged." As the traders raised their rifles, Rose's mind flashed with memories. Clara scolding her for speaking too softly. Evelyn whispering poison into eager ears, the townsfolk sneering as they scrawled thief across the bakery door. She had been silent her entire life, letting others write her story, but no more. With a surge of determination, she stepped out from behind Luke, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Enough!" she cried, startling even herself. Everyone froze for a heartbeat, the torchlight flickering wildly against their stunned faces. "You think you can scare me into silence, Walter? But you've underestimated me just like Clara always did," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This evidence proves you've been plotting with her to destroy not just Luke, but this entire town. If I fall here tonight, someone will find it. The truth will come out, and you'll hang for your crimes." The men exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering at her fierce conviction. Luke's chest swelled with pride as he watched her transform before his eyes, from timid to unbreakable. Walter's grin wavered, his eyes narrowing in fury. "You little fool," he spat. "You think you can frighten me with words?" He lunged for her, but Rose was ready. She swung the heavy silver pouch with all her strength, striking him across the face with a sickening crack. Walter stumbled backward, howling, as Luke exploded into motion, tackling one of the armed traders and sending his rifle skittering across the floor. Chaos erupted in the cramped cabin, fists flying, shots ringing out, the air thick with smoke and shouting. Rose dove for the fallen rifle, her hands trembling but steady enough to aim it toward the doorway where more men poured in. "Stay back!" she screamed, and for once they obeyed, startled by the fire blazing in her eyes. Outside, the thunder of hooves split the night as James and a band of loyal ranch hands charged toward the cabin, drawn by the commotion. Their war cries mingled with the sharp reports of gunfire as they clashed with Walter's men beneath the cold light of the moon. Inside, Luke overpowered Walter, pinning him to the floor as Rose stood guard with the rifle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's over," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "The town will hear the truth." Walter spat blood and laughed bitterly. "Clara will never let you live to tell it." Rose's heart twisted at the mention of her sister. But she didn't falter. She met Luke's gaze, strength shining through her tears. "Then we'll face her together." As James burst through the doorway with reinforcements, Rose realized for the first time that she was no longer a shadow. She was a woman forged in fire and battle, ready to claim her rightful place by Luke's side and fight for the future they both deserved. Dawn's first light spilled over the prairie like a blessing, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold as the battered survivors rode back into town. Luke rode at the front, his jaw set. Walter Briggs slumped and bound behind him on a second horse, his bruised face a map of defeat. Rose clutched the leather pouch of silver and the marked map to her chest, her body sore and trembling but her spirit blazing with a strength she had never known. Behind them, James and the loyal ranch hands herded the captured traders, their torches smoldering like ghosts of the night's battle. As they reached the town square, a crowd gathered quickly, curiosity and hostility colliding in a storm of whispers. Clara emerged from her home, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour, her black morning dress gleaming in the morning light, Evelyn fluttering anxiously at her side. Her eyes widened when she saw Walter shackled, but she recovered swiftly, her face melting into an expression of wounded innocence. "What is this?" she cried, her voice trembling in just the right places. "Luke Carson comes storming in with criminals and dares to frighten honest folk? Is this what you call justice?" Luke dismounted with a controlled fury, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "The only criminal here is Walter Briggs," he declared, "and the woman standing beside him, cloaked in lies." He turned to the crowd, holding up the map and the pouch of coins. "These are proof of a conspiracy to steal our grazing lands and hand this town to the traitors. Clara and Walter orchestrated every whisper, every vote, every attack." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the councilmen pushed forward, their faces pale. Clara laughed, a brittle, bitter sound. "Desperation makes you wild, Luke. You'd weave any tale to save your own skin. Do you expect them to take the word of a man who humiliated his bride and flaunted her sister like a trophy?" She swept her gaze towards Rose, her eyes gleaming with hatred. "And you, standing there like some poor victim, tell them, Rose, tell them how you seduced him behind my back." Rose's heart pounded, fear clawing at her throat, but she forced herself to step forward, clutching the torn veil she had carried since that fateful day. Her voice rang out clear and strong, echoing across the square. "I was silent too long while you spun your lies, Clara. No more." She held up the veil, its ragged edge fluttering in the morning breeze. "This tore the day you struck me, the day your mask slipped. You've always been more concerned with power than love. Luke saw the truth before anyone else, and now so will they." She turned to the councilmen, thrusting the evidence into their hands. "Look at the map. Look at the silver. Clara's been selling us out to outsiders, betraying her own people for wealth and pride." The crowd roared, shock giving way to anger. Some shouted for Clara's arrest. Others simply wept as the depth of her treachery sank in. Walter tried to speak, but Luke's fist silenced him with one decisive blow. Clara's composure shattered, her face contorting with rage. "Fools!" she screamed. "You think you've won, but without me, you're nothing." She lunged at Rose, her nails catching on her sister's sleeve. But Rose didn't flinch. With a strength born of heartbreak, she stepped aside, and Clara fell to the ground, her black dress pooling like spilled ink. Mayor Briggs raised his hand, his voice trembling. "Clara Whitfield, you are hereby stripped of your standing and confined until judgment is passed." The townsfolk closed in, their former idol now a prisoner of her own deceit. Rose stood tall beside Luke, her tears shining in the sunlight. For the first time, the whispers around her were no longer hateful. They were reverent. And as she clutched Luke's hand, she knew that though the fight was not yet over, the truth had finally begun to burn away the lies. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long golden rays over the town square that had become a battlefield of hearts and loyalties. Though Clara had been exposed, her venom still seeped through the cracks of the community, leaving fear and unrest in its wake. Walter Briggs, bound and bloodied, had been locked in the council hall, but his allies were not finished. As Rose stood beside Luke, her hand clasped tightly in his, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the plains like an ominous warning. James burst through the crowd, breathless and wild-eyed. "Luke!" he shouted. "They're coming! The rest of Walter's men armed to the teeth! Clara must have sent word before she was caught. They aim to burn the town and reclaim what they've lost." Panic rippled through the townsfolk, women clutching children, men shouting orders without direction. Clara, guarded but unrepentant, sneered from where she sat under watch. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice sharp as broken glass. "My friends are loyal. They'll tear this place apart to free me and finish what we started." Rose's stomach churned, fear battling the fierce resolve she had fought so hard to build. She looked to Luke, whose storm-gray eyes burned with the steady fire of a man who would not let his people fall. "We make our stand here," he said firmly. "We end this today." The townsfolk scrambled to fortify the square, overturning wagons for barricades, filling buckets at the well in case of fire. Luke moved among them with commanding presence, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. James and the ranch hands took up positions with rifles, while Rose gathered the women and children inside the church, whispering words of comfort even as her own hands trembled. She tied the torn wedding veil around her wrist like a banner of defiance, a silent vow that she would not cower in the shadows ever again. As the riders crested the hill, the setting sun lit their weapons like molten fire. There were dozens of them, their war cries chilling the air as they charged down toward the town. Clara's mocking laughter rose above the din, her eyes gleaming with vicious triumph. The first shots rang out, echoing through the square as smoke and chaos erupted. Luke fired with deadly precision, James shouting commands to hold the line. Horses screamed, men fell, and the clash of battle swallowed the town in a storm of violence. Rose knelt beside the wounded, tearing strips from her skirt to bind injuries, her voice steady as she urged terrified children to stay low. When a burning torch was hurled onto the church roof, she raced outside, seizing a bucket and dousing the flames before they could spread. Luke saw her through the smoke, his heart seizing with both pride and terror at her courage. The battle reached its peak as Walter's second-in-command. A hulking brute named Carter barreled toward Luke with a raised axe. Luke met him head-on, the two men grappling in a vicious struggle that seemed to shake the very earth. Clara screamed for Carter to kill him, her voice shrill with desperation. But in that moment, Rose saw her chance. She grabbed a fallen rifle and aimed, her hands steady despite the chaos. With a single shot, she struck Carter in the shoulder, giving Luke the opening he needed to strike the final blow. Carter fell, the enemy riders breaking at the sight of their leader's defeat. The remaining men fled into the twilight, their ambitions crumbling like ash. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the defenders. Luke turned to see Rose standing tall amid the wreckage, smoke swirling around her like a crown. Clara's face twisted in horror as she realized her power was gone forever. Luke's voice rang out, strong and unyielding. This town belongs to its people, not to liars and thieves. The crowd erupted in cheers, lifting Rose and Luke on a tide of victory as Clara was dragged away screaming. And for the first time, Rose felt the full weight of her courage, knowing she had not only survived the storm, but helped to end it. The next morning dawned soft and golden, sunlight spilling gently over the battered town, as if the earth itself sought to wash away the scars of the night before. Smoke still curled lazily from the smoldering ruins of barricades and wagons, but the air carried a sense of renewal, of fragile hope beginning to take root. Rose stood at the edge of the square, her torn wedding veil now tied around a wooden post like a banner of survival, its ragged edges fluttering in the warm breeze. Children laughed as they chased one another among the scattered debris, their carefree voices proof that peace was returning. Townsfolk moved with quiet purpose, sweeping away ash, righting toppled wagons, and offering shy smiles to Rose whenever she passed. No longer did they hiss "thief" or avert their eyes. Now they looked at her with gratitude, for she had faced the storm alongside them and emerged shining. Clara sat beneath heavy guard outside the council hall. Her once pristine black dress dirtied and torn, her proud face shadowed with rage and despair. She no longer screamed or pleaded, her eyes were distant, fixed on a future she had lost through her own greed. Walter Briggs and his surviving men had been taken away at dawn to face judgment, their betrayal laid bare for all to see. The lies that had poisoned the town were finally burned away, leaving only truth. Rose approached Clara slowly, her heart heavy despite everything. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "All I ever wanted was to love you as my sister." Clara's lips parted, 1,000 unspoken words flickering in her eyes. But in the end, she turned her face away, silent. Rose felt a tear slip down her cheek, then turned and walked back toward Luke, knowing that some wounds could never be healed. Luke stood waiting near the church steps, his storm-gray eyes softening as they met hers. He reached out, taking her hands in his, rough palms warm and steady. "It's over," he murmured, though the emotion in his voice betrayed the battles still raging inside him. "We survived." Rose looked around at the townsfolk who had once shunned her, now standing together as a community reborn. "We didn't just survive," she said, her voice strong. "We changed. They see the truth now, Luke. About you, about me, about everything." James and the ranch hands approached, grinning through their exhaustion. "The council voted this morning," James announced proudly. "Your grazing rights are secure, Luke. Walter's land will be divided among the families he tried to ruin." Luke nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. The church bell began to toll, clear and bright, calling the townsfolk to gather. The minister stepped forward, his voice carrying across the square. "Today we celebrate not just victory but unity. We will no longer allow deceit to rule our hearts. And in that spirit, we witness a new beginning." He gestured toward Luke and Rose, who stood side by side before the crowd. Clara had tried to destroy them with her lies, but now they would bind themselves together with truth. Luke draped the cleaned and mended veil over Rose's shoulders, the same veil that had once symbolized betrayal now shining as a sign of love and redemption. The crowd erupted in cheers, tears streaming down faces as they watched the quiet sister finally step into the light she had always deserved. As the sun rose higher, Luke kissed Rose's forehead, whispering words only she could hear. "No more shadows," he promised. "Only us, only truth." Rose smiled through her tears, knowing that this was the life she had fought for, the life they had built together from the ashes of pain and deceit. Above them, a lone eagle soared against the endless sky. Its cry a final blessing over a town reborn, a love redeemed, and a quiet woman who had found her voice at last.